Hello and welcome to this episode of the Curiosity Key podcast, where I'm joined by Iain Woodhouse, CEO and founder of Carbomap and Professor of Applied Earth Observation at the University of Edinburgh. Is that right?
That's correct.
Oh, yes, got it all in one go. So thank you so much for joining me on this podcast, Iain.
My pleasure.
Would you like to just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about Carbomap and kind of what you're hoping to achieve with it?
Okay, so Carbomap was a spin-out from the University of Edinburgh in 2013. So I'm one of those academics that have still got a footprint in both the academic world at the university, but also in the company. And we spun it out based on a patent that we developed for a new LiDAR system for mapping forests. And there was a group of academics involved in that, and a couple of us had a bit more interest and expertise and background in the commercial world, and two of us that were more academic. So we decided that in order to pursue the science, two of us would stick with it in terms of applying for research grants through the academic world, and two of us would go into to push forward the company, see if we could accelerate the development of the science and the application of that in the commercial world. So that was back in 2013, and so we've been bootstrapping for six years now, or 6 years come September, and that's what keeps me busy.
Love it. And for anybody that's listening to this that is not aware of LiDAR, because obviously we met when I used to sort of sell the LiDAR sensors, is laser scanning technology. Do you want to explain to our listeners, as in layman's terms, what LiDAR is and how you're using LiDAR from a forestry point of view?
Yep. So there's various ways to measure the Earth's surface, and you can do that from drones or from aircraft or from space. And my particular background is using radar, so transmitting microwave signals, bouncing them off the Earth, measuring the signal that comes back, and determining things like how much forest is there or what type of crop cover there is, mapping other properties on the Earth's surface or of the oceans or ice. And so that's what I do. Most of my teaching is in that side of things as well. But you can also do something that's a bit like radar with laser light. So you fire a laser beam and you measure the time it takes for the echoes to come back, and that's a LiDAR system. And they're very well advanced now, both for aircraft and drones. There are some LiDARs that have flown in space, but they're more on the science side of things. The commercial mapping is much more focused on airborne and drone-based LiDAR just now. And so the key thing about the fact that you can make the distance measurements with the LiDAR is that you can measure the three-dimensional structure of the trees. So in a forestry environment, being able to measure the three-dimensional data is really significant. Gives you much more information on the structure and the size of the trees.
And the amazing thing about using LiDAR on trees is that you get absolutely incredible point cloud data, and it just looks so visually stunning. Because if anybody ever asked me about what I did, I always kind of picked out the LiDAR data from trees, because it was always the thing that got the biggest response. Everybody's like, oh, it just looks so pretty. It just looks amazing. It's like a piece of art, which it kind of is, really, isn't it?
It is. It's very visually attractive. And so LinkedIn and Twitter are full of people tweeting nice images of data sets from forests, just because it's very clear that the richness of the information is very clear from forest as well, just because they're quite elaborate three-dimensional structures. So.
Oh, I mean, I knew nothing about laser scanning or LiDAR until 2011, which is when I joined 3D laser mapping. And then It was a bit like kind of my mind was completely blown as to the huge variety of applications that you can use it on, and also the benefits to, like society and the world, that goes way beyond just measuring things.
Yes, and it's the exciting thing in that domain is actually I just saw recently the first results coming from the NASA's new laser scanner that's on the International Space Station. So that's covering the entire globe and measuring three-dimensional structure from vegetation. So that's amazing. That's how far it has come, that we can stick these laser systems on on space stations and satellites and measure properties of the Earth from that.
Well, so you've got quite an ambitious vision personally, and also a vision for Carbomap as well. In that, I'm sure you told me, or I've read it somewhere, that you plan to completely eradicate deforestation by 2030. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to do that myself, but that's my a lot. So going back some years, it was 2007 really, which was the formative year for me, because I did a Scotland-Malawi partnership academic exchange program to Malawi. So I spent a semester teaching there. Took the family; boys were still very young, but just seeing what's happening in Malawi. Malawi is going through quite rapid deforestation, and it has a very high population density. And what I see in Malawi is essentially a microcosm of all the challenges that the planet is going to face over the next 50, 70 years. And it made me realize that we really have to tackle that issue of deforestation, because the rate at which we lose forests globally is something like a football pitch-sized area of forest every 2 seconds. Okay, so that's how fast it's going. And I think I chose 2030 simply because that's roughly when I retire. And so it was a question of saying, well, what's my contribution going to be here? If that's the vision that you're going to have cut down or you're going to stop deforestation by then, what's my role in there? So that's where the incentive to spin out Carbomap, for example, was partly taking the research in the university environment and saying that, well, it's great doing these exciting, interesting, innovative new ideas, but they have to find some way to translate into real practice. So they're actually being implemented on a day-to-day basis. And so that's where I see my contribution in terms of that vision of the zero deforestation is by providing the information that allows you to manage the forest better, or to make better decisions about the landscape. It's not going to be impossible to always stop every kind of deforestation, and so it's really a net deforestation. Is that we have to be, there'll be some areas where we're growing more trees, and some areas that the trees will still have to be cut down. But you can only monitor that if you've got the right tools to know where the forests are, how much forest there are, how it's growing. So that's where that's where I chip in. And in fact, since I and possibly since we had that conversation, the World Wildlife Fund have actually their target for zero deforestation is 2020. So I could have 10 years of being able to do something completely different if it's all sorted by 2020. I don't think it looks like they're on track, but
I know I do remember reading that, and I was like, wow. So 2020 is actually next year.
Yeah, that's where it's a little bit ambitious. 2030 maybe is a slightly more realistic target.
Yeah. And can you explain to people that are listening that are maybe not as aware of the impacts of deforestation, why it's something that we need to be more aware of, and why we need to support projects like this?
Well, one of the key things, just in terms of climate change, is again coming to the fore of media coverage and political discussion. Trees absorb carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they're also a store of carbon. So if you take a forest and you cut it down, you lose all the carbon that was in those trees. It partly depends what you do with it, but certainly if you burn down that forest, all that carbon is released into the atmosphere, and you've also no longer got the trees there that are consuming the carbon out of the atmosphere. So through that process of photosynthesis, they are the nature's carbon capture and storage device, and so they are they're really important in terms of that balance of how much carbon we put into the atmosphere versus how much carbon is sucked out of the atmosphere. Beyond that, they're important for so water and flood protection. So one of the things that trees do is that they slow the flow of water. In terms of if you cut down all the trees, it tends to, the rains wash off the topsoils, so you lose the fertility of the topsoils. The water drains into the rivers much faster. You're much more likely to have flooding as a consequence of cutting down the trees. And they're also a contributor in terms of local climate. So they can often drive the precipitation in a regional area. Shall I go on? There's a few more.
Well, I could talk to you about this for ages, because I'm like, very interested in the topic of climate change, and I definitely believe that business, like through business, we have the power to make a significant impact, and I think it's great to see so many individuals get behind the climate change challenge that we're facing. But what I'd like to see is a few more businesses get behind the climate change side of things, because then I think we have the power to make a real big impact and actually tackle this. Because yes, it's great when individuals sort of take recycling responsibly and turning off lights and things like that as well, but it's through business that we're going to make those big changes. Without boring people who are just like, more on the climate change, but what would you say to people that are like, I don't believe in climate change, which has come across the news in recent months?
It doesn't bother me too much, as long as they realize that, well, the things like destroying forests, the unsustainable agriculture, and the production of food, the unhindered accessing of fishing resources. You can go on in terms of whether you buy into climate change or not. I mean, I think you should, but even those people that are going to be intransigent and not want to move from that very definitive position of saying that, well, I'm never going to believe in climate change. Regardless of that, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we have to be engaged with in terms of how we deal with waste, how we're going to feed everybody, the whole elements that actually drive the environment currently in a negative direction. So I would argue that if we can tackle all those things for very good, straightforward, blatant reasons, you'll see a net contribution in terms of its positive impact on climate change anyway. And if we can get people to rally around that, I think that will be easier. Certainly, there's some parts of the world, North America would be a very strong example, where climate change has become such a political and even moral or religious kind of narrative, and that is unhelpful because it kind of distracts from the science. And I would say, well, we can bypass that. There's really important reasons to talk about sustainable agriculture and feeding everybody. There's really important reasons why you want to maintain forests and keep them healthy and have and tackle things like deforestation. So there's lots of things to be tackled that aren't explicitly or don't have to be explicitly tied to climate change, that people should be able to rally around, even if they are still arguing about climate change.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So before we end up going down a climate change debate, which would be very interesting and fascinating, I kind of want to bring it back to the technology. And because you said that, you started in 2013 and that you've been bootstrapping. But, from experience, the sort of technology that you're working with, especially kind of like drones and laser scanning technology specifically for drones, we're not talking about cheap technology here either. So how have you approached the technology side of things whilst still trying to kind of bootstrap, save money and achieve what you want to achieve?
That's mostly through partnering with other people. So we partner with people who have drones and fly them. We're partnering with a new company just now who's designed a bespoke drone that was basically designed around our explicit wish list for carrying survey grade LiDAR and other instruments. So we also work with big companies. So Regal, as you know, a big company based out of Austria, that's a global company that builds LiDAR. They've been very supportive in terms of giving us access to instrumentation and things to develop some of that new technology. And so that's how we've done it to date for the technology side of things, is that largely we've been doing it with partners, and that includes universities, and the University of Edinburgh as well has a strong team here. So that's how we get around that. And then the rest of the time it's been software development, which you can do with a computer and some clever people.
Computer and some clever people. Yes, definitely. I remember trying to learn how to do software development and coding. Somebody asked me if I could code the other day, and I was just like, well, I can, but not very well. And you certainly wouldn't want me to code anything that you want to do anything with. You definitely need clever people to be involved in code. So do you have any advice for anybody listening that is looking at adopting like kind of high value technology in order to help them solve their problems, but wants to do it via partnerships instead of spending lots of cash up front?
So you mean small companies trying to develop new innovative technologies, or?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess that's the, taking advantage of their networks and finding those companies that are, because often, and you must have seen this before, is that as companies get bigger, they often become less innovative, and
Yep.
and so they're often open-minded to have conversations with small companies who've got great ideas. You got to be careful about that. That relationship can be very lopsided sometimes, so you have to be careful how you manage that. But there's certainly opportunities, and certainly in the UK at the moment, there's lots of funding opportunities that involve partnerships with universities and other SMEs or larger companies. And so leveraging that funding can often be easier if you're teaming up with somebody.
Yeah, definitely on the funding and partnerships with universities, because I know that the companies that I've worked for in the past have never, they've not been tied to universities, but they have worked with universities on their, well, I think I'm going back a couple of years now, but it was a knowledge transfer partnership. Does that still exist today?
Yep. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, so using things like the knowledge transfer partnerships, getting involved in PhD research, and especially for companies that want to innovate and do that research, that was definitely a real big help for us when I was working in that space. I guess you're quite lucky because you're heavily involved in the university anyway.
Well, that's I guess a lot of the innovation and spin-outs or startups that occur, it's often not exclusively, but certainly on the technology side, probably has come out of some activity within a university anyway. And even if it hasn't, there are people they're far more available now, I think, than they've ever been in terms of in universities there to help support and find routes to funding, whether that's regional funding, national funding, international funding. There's now quite a lot of opportunities because it's now very clearly recognised that big chasm of taking that technology, that final step, is really quite tricky. And we certainly came across that, where you get to a point where the research councils and academic funding says, well, that's not really research anymore. You're just kind of building a prototype. Mm-hmm. And the investors or the companies that you might partner with or potential customers are saying, what, you've not even built a prototype yet? And so that gap is really quite a challenge. There's certainly in my field, so for Earth observation technology, there's fantastic initiatives like the Centre for Earth Observation Instrumentation, and they have funding available that almost perfectly fits into that gap to help that transfer. And I imagine in many other technology topics, there may well be funding available that specifically addresses that gap, because it's certainly, it's known about, it's talked about, people write books about it. That doesn't mean it's easy to find that funding, but often it is available because people know it's a difficult step to do.
Yeah, and I think the kind of key piece of learning for anybody listening here is that, just because you have an ambitious goal doesn't mean that you can't achieve it, but explore partnerships, funding opportunities, and go out and look for ways that you can get help to achieve that goal, rather than try and tackle it yourself and think that you can do it on your own, or think that you have to do it on your own.
You certainly don't have to. And some people will be lucky enough that they'll get a big wad of cash from some investment, a VC or an angel will come in and allow them to accelerate that. But I think increasingly, certainly in my sector, so space data and Earth observation data generally, it's very clear that you have to do that with other people. There's very few companies in the world that do the whole vertical in that domain, and so making sure that you're partnering with the right people is definitely an advantage.
collaboration over competition, or collaboration over doing it yourself any day, for sure.
Yeah.
I was like, I see so many people like struggle to do something on their own because they like refuse to refuse to ask for help, or they're like, no, I can't afford to get help, or there isn't another way. And it's like, well, there's lots of different ways. You can pay for help, but then you can also find help in other avenues as well. It's just finding places to look for it, or asking your network to point you in the right direction as well.
Definitely, and most people are willing to help in some way if you ask them.
Yes.
They won't do it, and they won't necessarily do it for you. But if you go and ask them for advice on where to find somebody that can help with that,
the power of a strong network. I'm always ranting and raving on about this. Is that if you have a good network, then they are willing to help you and support you when you need it.
Yes, I think that's true.
Yeah, for sure. So the other question that I did have was around, because obviously, especially drone technology and laser scanning technology specifically for drones is evolving at such a rapid rate. So, there's always new sensors that are lighter and faster and do more every year. There are lighter drones that do, with all the bells and whistles. How do you keep up to date with the latest technology, or how do you stop yourself getting distracted with the next shiny object?
So I have fantastic colleagues in Carbomap that pull me back every time I get distracted by nice new shiny things. Because I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn enough to sort of see some of the new things pop up. That's generally where I get my news from. There's a few industry magazines that I will flick through, but they're, by the time you get the magazine, it's already weeks, if not months old. So the new shiny things that come through, I will see them generally on LinkedIn or Twitter before I see them anywhere else. And then I will, what usually happens is I get excited about that and then take that to the team, and then they say, well, is there a customer? Is anybody going to buy it? And I'll say, well, I don't know yet. So, and then it gets moved to one side until I can demonstrate that somebody actually is willing to buy it.
But so you're a fellow sufferer of shiny object syndrome, then?
Yes, definitely. But that's where I have that kind of. It's not quite Jekyll and Hyde. That would be a bit harsh. But in terms of being academic and business person, I can indulge that shiny object thing in the academic side, because that's what we should be doing, is thinking up new ideas and looking at new stuff without necessarily thinking about whether it's got a customer or somebody's going to pay for it. It's to just explore and innovate and be a bit imaginative. And usually there's a fair collection of MSc students that will sometimes pick that up for a dissertation project or something. So and that's great for them to be able to explore something that's right at the cutting edge. So that's I get the benefit of both worlds in that respect.
Yeah, because it can be so distracting. I mean, I'm really, really guilty of this. I'll come up with a really good idea. I'll listen to a podcast, watch something, and I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely want to go down that route. And I think because I work for myself, I work with a coach and part of a coaching group to kind of rein me back in again and sort of say, you've got a colleague that says to you, do you have a client for that? Is this supporting the goals? And somebody just to have that kind of like calm influence that's not like, yes, just go for it and go down this distracting route.
I definitely find that having some sense of a vision and a clear goal of what your company is trying to do, it helps you to have those conversations, because just like you were saying, is that somebody can then say, well, how can you map a path from this shiny thing to reaching our goal faster or more effectively? Or is it just a nice new fad and something that looks exciting and interesting and clever? And so with having that clear goal, it's much easier to have that conversation and to strip out the stuff that isn't actually contributing to that.
Yeah. And such great advice as well is just to, have that clear goal for what it is that you're doing. Either write it down or make it apparent. So if you do bring a new idea to the table, ask yourself, is that new idea in line with your goal? Is it going to help you achieve that goal? And, do you have the support to be able to do it? But also what you were saying before as well is a real good example of kind of collaborative team leadership and understanding to have the right personality types in your business. Yep. I definitely learned this quite a few years ago. I think I went on a leadership course. I was reading lots of things about different personality types in a team, and especially people like me and you that come up with all these crazy ideas. You need somebody that's a little bit more process driven and structured that will then rein you back in again. The two personality types can kind of like bounce off one another. Do you have that good mix? Because you've got quite a few people on your board, haven't you? Do you have a good mix of personality types that support you and challenge you and things like that?
Absolutely. It is, our most recent member to join is Gillian Fleming. Gillian was a Saltire Fellow, which is a training program in Scotland. She's probably she has the biggest influence in terms of that customer side of things. So we brought her in specifically because we were too heavy on the too heavy on the sort of technical cleverness and not focusing enough on the business and the market. And so Gillian generally steers us in that direction. And then we have quite a good board where we've got a different personality types, and we feel free to have a good old blether at our board meetings. So we disagree a lot, which I like. So it's a constructive discussion that we disagree constructively. So, but it is because we have we know what it is we're trying to do. And so it can always be framed. It's never a personal argument. It's always how does this get us to where we're trying to get to? And so Carbomap is very focused at the moment in terms of making access to three-dimensional environmental data or should be available to everybody. And as you know, the thing is, and you mentioned earlier, things like LiDAR are expensive bits of kit. You look at the whole continent of Africa, there's probably not even half a dozen airborne LiDAR companies in the entire continent. So getting access to that high quality data is very difficult. And so if our vision is in Cobramap is to make sure that people have access to that three-dimensional data, all our discussion can then be around, well, how does it get us to that? That somebody's got a new idea, or two people have got conflicting ideas, and the thing is, well, which is the one that gets us to that goal faster or more effectively, or does it in a better way?
Yeah. And how have you found the barriers to entry in terms of actually getting the equipment into Africa, especially certain countries? Because I remember trying to arrange demonstrations and things like that. We used to sell to the mines, and that was a logistical nightmare. Not impossible, but a logistical nightmare.
It is very variable, as you've pointed out. Africa is a big continent, and lots of different countries, and each country, certainly so far, we find is that there's lots of different barriers. So we're looking at having a UAV with a LiDAR on it in Ghana in later this year in a few months' time, and so far it's going smoothly. But,
don't want to jinx it.
I know. We touch wood. We certainly know of other places where it's a bit. It's been harder. We know of other practical issues to do with just getting the right kind of fuel, because a lot of the local petrol stations might have diluted your petrol, and that's not necessarily very good for your engine. If you've got batteries, I know of another colleague who's flying a UAV with a LiDAR on it, and it's a battery-powered UAV, and they're having difficulty getting their batteries to the location they want to collect the data. So there's lots of hurdles to get around, but I'm pretty confident that the next 10 years we're all seeing that rapid movement of the use of UAVs and drones for various applications. And like you were talking about earlier, is that it's moving very fast. The drones are getting bigger, faster, more advanced. The technology, the instrumentation and sensors are getting smaller and not degrading the quality as a consequence. And it will definitely be the case within 10 years. It'll be just standard surveying practice to get drones flying around collecting environmental data. And that will be the countries that aren't doing that or stopping that happening will be behind the curve.
Yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating, just from not from a user's point of view, but just to see how the technology emerges, how customers, businesses, and the general public are adopting to drone technology and their general response. So it's an exciting, I think probably like 5-10 years ahead, with a lot of change and a lot of advancement as well. So I'm definitely going to kind of keep up to date with what's going on. But I did want to ask you, in terms of, have you got any advice for companies that are in the technical space and they're having to deal with barriers to entry, challenges like the challenges that you just described? How do you kind of stay on track and not get too discouraged by the barriers and the challenges that crop up?
I think we've gone through various periods of being discouraged. So I don't think you should be frightened about being discouraged. That's always going to be the case when you're trying to sort of push those boundaries and do innovative things. So one of the things I came across recently is just starting to look back and realize how many things that we've done that are actually been very successful and in fact are being adopted or taken up, or often overtook us quite early because we didn't have the capital to really propel something. And it kind of just rather than being despondent about those kind of things, is that just propels us to realize that actually we are very good at innovating and seeing things coming, and we just have to work harder at making sure that we push them forward. But it is, you're always going to get low points when you're pushing at that innovation envelope. It's never always going to go straightforwardly. You mentioned having a coach. That's I've done a lot of work with a business coach, which I think has been helpful in terms of making sure that we spend some time. So the key thing I learned from them was about spending time on the business rather than just in the business. Mm-hmm. So we definitely sort of do that as a company in terms of making sure that we do find some time to just sit back and say, well, what, because we get caught up in just delivering on the contracts that we do have that's keeping the lights on, and sometimes that can distract from the taking those steps forward. But I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great, because I think my hope is that these podcast episodes are interesting to people that aren't necessarily aware of the technology and the things that are going on in the world, but then also inspirational and empowering to kind of give you new ideas and things to help you start businesses that you want to start, or just help people overcome some of the challenges that they're facing. Because let's be honest, like, getting involved with a tech startup, either as an owner, a founder, a leader, an investor, whatever, it's always going to be a challenge. But it's something that I personally absolutely love. I love working with startups. I love talking to startups, because this podcast is called The Curiosity Key, because I'm just such a naturally curious person. I'm always like wanting to know more. So I hope that this is helpful. And for me, I think you're sort of saying lots of valuable things that will help people. So thank you. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to kind of keep up to date with what Carbomap's doing, what you're doing, or get in touch?
Twitter is easy. So at Carbomap, that's fairly straightforward. info@carbomap.com is definitely one way. I always get a copy of those emails, so that's the easiest way. You could certainly email me directly at i.h.woodhouse@carbomap.com. That's just longer to remember than info at. They'll both get to me. So the info at is an easy one to remember. And I try to be fairly active on LinkedIn. I know that puts me into a certain age bracket, the fact that I'm LinkedIn and Twitter, and there are other social media platforms available. But they're the two that are easier to find me or follow me on, or follow Carbomap to keep track of what we're doing.
Oh, definitely not. I think Twitter seems to be getting a bit of a bad rep at the moment, but in the tech world, I think Twitter's still as strong as it's ever been. And yeah, LinkedIn is kind of getting younger and younger. There's a lot of kind of people that are entering the workforce using it more and more now. So I wouldn't be afraid of being in a particular age bracket of using it.
Yeah, no, I'm not afraid of that. And I try to encourage my students to connect me on LinkedIn because for my students, it's basically me giving them my address book and saying, come and, be connected to me because you might find that useful at some point.
Yeah, and these sort of students that will have these crazy ideas at some point in the future want to start their own businesses, and then you can help and support them, get their ideas off the ground as well, which is, in my mind, what it's all about.
Yeah, no, that's that process of Carbomap, and then the contributions that I made to starting up Ecometrica before that, so that's back to 2008. It's made me realize just how much fun that starting process is. Once it's up and running and it's going, that's when I would pass on to somebody else to take it on. But they getting things started and moving in the first instance, that's what I get the biggest kick out of.
Yeah. And just to finish up, because I haven't asked you this one question, which is like, what's next for Carbomap? What's the next big project?
What's next for Carbomap? We're doing, interestingly, inspired by something you did on LinkedIn before about the one for one, was it you called it?
Buy B1G1, buy one give one, was it?
Yeah, that's what, buy one give one.
Yes.
We're looking at expanding our training in terms of so one of the things that we want to be able to do is to help individual countries or organizations set up their own Earth observation system, and we want to help train people and help them build that system for themselves. So almost like the IKEA of the Earth observation world.
Oh, fantastic!
So they can build that. But what we're about to do is start offering us making an offer whereby if people buy our training services, for every person that they pay to get trained, we will be training people in sub-Saharan Africa for free, essentially, for them, so that we will. It's what did you call it? Buy one, give one.
Buy one, give one. Yeah.
So for every trainee that they buy from us, we'll be giving a trainee to somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa. And our projects at the moment are Malawi, Zambia, Kenya, and Ghana is where we're mostly active in that. So that's inspired by your proposal on LinkedIn. That's what.
Oh, I love it.
But yeah, so we're currently looking at building more tools to help people do it for themselves, essentially, rather than because it's one of the big challenges, certainly through a lot of the developing world, is that they can't. There's these big space companies that are offering services, but they're all asking, payment for it, and a lot of these countries and the organizations within them don't necessarily have the budget lines that allow them to buy those services. So they want to be able to do it themselves in country and build that expertise and build their own country's capacity for doing, and handling Earth observation data from satellites or drones and using it internally in their own infrastructure. So that's where we're moving next in Carbomap.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, for me, the kind of buy one, give one approach is just like a no-brainer for me, because that's why I set up my business, because I wanted to create that impact. And I think that through business, we have the power to make a significant impact in the world, especially through empowering other people. For me, it's all about education, something that I feel very strongly about. But exactly what you're saying is that, you can help empower other people that need it instead of having to just charge them for it and then use what you're doing to help more people on a global scale. So that's amazing. And then for everybody listening, I will include all of the links and things like things that we've spoken about today in the show notes. Just go to charliewhyman.com/podcast and all of the information will be on there. So I could probably talk to you for ages, Iain, but thank you so much for coming on this podcast and sharing what it is that you're up to. And I wish you all the very best for the future.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great chatting to you again, Charlie.
Awesome. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Awesome.